What happens when just hours before the vows, the groom hears a truth he was never meant to know? A truth that rips the fabric of everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the woman waiting to meet him at the altar? Malik Jordan was a man who earned everything the hard way. Harlem born and Harlem built, raised by a mother who worked double shifts and prayed triple prayers, he grew from hardship, not handouts. Today, in front of nearly 200 guests and a gospel choir, he was supposed to marry Aaliyah Thomas, a Southern beauty with a magnetic smile and ambition to match. But just as the clock ticked toward their forever, Malik overheard something no groom should ever hear. He didn't confront her. He didn't scream. He simply adjusted his collar and waited. Then he walked back into that wedding, not with vows, but with the truth and a mic. The summer sun rose slow and stubborn over Harlem, pressing heat against the brownstones like a hand on a heartbeat. The neighborhood stirred with its usual rhythm. Soul music blaring from an open window, kids shouting through the mist of a cracked fire hydrant, and the scent of frying bacon weaving through every brick and alleyway. Inside the penthouse suite of the Renaissance Ballroom on 138th Street, Malik Jordan stood before a tall mirror, staring at a man in a tuxedo who hardly recognized himself. The suit was perfect, deep plum with a satin black lapel that hugged his frame like it had been stitched for royalty. Gold cufflinks shimmered on his wrists, passed down from his grandfather, who wore them on the day he married Malik's grandmother back in 1951. There was legacy here, legacy in the way Malik carried himself, in the quiet pride behind his posture. He looked like success, like a man who had arrived. But beneath all that polish, something flickered. "Damn, bro," said Terrence, his cousin and best man, walking up behind him with a grin. "You look like you just stepped out of a GQ spread. Obama would salute you, Idris would envy you." Malik smirked, adjusting his bow tie, though his hands trembled slightly. "Thanks, T. You good?" "Just nerves, I guess." "Understandable. You about to marry a whole goddess. Harlem royalty. Half the guests here are already calling y'all black love goals." Malik chuckled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Across the suite, his mother, Ms. Ruth, sat in a silver gown that sparkled like stardust. She was short and stout, with eyes that missed nothing and a mouth that could bless you or break you, depending on the time of day. Today, though, she was nothing but soft smiles and glistening eyes. "My baby," she said, rising slowly and fixing his collar. "I remember when you were 5, putting a towel over your shoulders and calling yourself a superhero. And look at you now. Real life won. You made it, Malik." He leaned in, hugged her gently. "You ready?" Terrence asked. "I think so." Truth was, Malik had never been the type to doubt himself. He built his life from concrete and sacrifice, graduating college without debt, launching a startup that helped local black-owned businesses digitize their operations, and giving back to the same streets that raised him. Every move he made had purpose, precision. That included falling in love with Aaliyah Thomas. They met 2 years ago at a charity event in Brooklyn. She was all confidence and curves, working the room like a CEO at Fashion Week. Malik spotted her from across the gala and barely had time to introduce himself before she slipped him a napkin with her number on it. No words, just a wink. That wink had turned into dinners, shared secrets, long walks in Central Park, and a ring he spent 3 months designing just to match her style. Aaliyah was intelligent, poised, and had a fire in her that mirrored his own. Today was supposed to be the beginning of something sacred. The gospel choir had already arrived downstairs. Ushers in white gloves were guiding guests to their seats. Aaliyah's bridal party was getting glammed up 2 floors down. Malik's phone buzzed with texts from cousins, uncles, frat brothers. But even as he soaked in the moment, something inside him wouldn't settle. He stepped away from the mirror and walked toward the window, gazing down at the scene below. A sea of elegance. Black women in wide-brimmed hats and flowing dresses. Brothers in tailored suits, young kids holding miniature bouquets. It was a picture of black excellence. "So, why did his chest feel tight?" "All right, folks," the event coordinator said, popping her head into the suite. We're lining up in 15. Malik, the pastor's asking if you'd like a moment of prayer before heading down. I'll be right there, Malik said. Just give me a minute. Alone. Terrence and Ms. Ruth exchanged a glance, but left without protest. The room quieted. The hum of anticipation still clung to the walls, but Malik walked past it and slipped out into the hallway. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he just needed to breathe. Maybe he needed silence. As he passed the stairwell and rounded the corner near the bridal suite, he slowed. Two voices echoed from behind a half-closed door. Light laughter, heels tapping across the floor. It was Aaliyah and her maid of honor, Simone. Malik didn't mean to eavesdrop. He only meant to pass by, but then he heard it. The voices behind the door were muffled at first. Just laughter. Teasing. Nothing out of the ordinary. Malik slowed his steps, not intending to snoop, but something in the tone caught his ear, just enough mischief to make his instincts twitch. Aaliyah's voice, unmistakable, rang out first. "Girl, please." Malik don't know what to do with all this. He just stable. And fine enough, I guess. A burst of laughter followed. Simone's. "Stop it," Simone said through giggles. "You ain't right." "I'm serious," Aaliyah said, breathless with amusement. "He's a good man. Pays the bills, loves me to death, ain't never raised his voice. But he ain't, the one." A pause. "The one?" Simone asked, the question dripping with curiosity. Aaliyah exhaled sharply. "Girl, he's safe. But I already told you, if things had gone right with Brandon, I wouldn't even be here. Malik is plan B." Simone gasped, then whispered loudly, "Aaliyah." "I'm just keeping it real," Aaliyah said almost proudly. "Look, I'm not going to blow up my life over it. Malik worships me, and that ain't a bad deal. I'll say the vows, take the pictures, collect the ring, and keep it cute. I just need to be the perfect wife in public." Another laugh. After today, Aaliyah said, her voice cooling, he'll be locked in. And by the time he figures it out, if he ever does, I'll already be too deep in to walk away from. Simone didn't respond right away. Only the faint sound of makeup brushes tapping against the vanity filled the gap. Malik stood there, frozen, the hallway tilting beneath him. Plan B. The words hit him in the chest harder than any punch he'd ever taken. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Dressed in poetry and spoken in jest, but poison nonetheless. And it was deliberate, casual, like stepping on something disposable. His heart thundered against his ribs. His mouth went dry. He felt his breath shallow, like the air had been sucked from the hallway. He backed away from the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. Every step felt like sinking through wet cement. Back in the hallway, he leaned against the cool wall and closed his eyes. His stomach churned. His palms were clammy. Malik wasn't a man easily shaken. He'd buried friends, seen poverty, built himself from the dirt up. But nothing prepared him for hearing the woman he loved talk about him like an arrangement, like a contract, not a covenant. In that moment of heartbreak, memory flooded him. He was 11 when his father walked out, left Ms. Ruth with 2 boys and a rent-controlled apartment that felt smaller every winter. Malik had grown up watching his mother fight for everything. She'd ironed strangers' clothes, cleaned uptown apartments, sold pies on the corner during holidays just to keep the lights on. And when Malik brought home straight A's, she cried. When he got into Howard on a full scholarship, she fainted in the kitchen. When he got his first 6-figure deal for his tech startup, she kissed his feet. Love, to him, had always been sacred, earned, protected. And now, the woman he'd spent 2 years building a future with had reduced that love to a fallback plan, a safety net, a ring and a facade. Malik's feet moved before his mind did. He walked down the hall, through the elevator doors, and back into his suite where Terrence and the groomsmen were laughing over group text. "Yo, we were just talking about your brother's speech from the rehearsal dinner," Terrence said. "He sounded like he was accepting an Oscar." Malik didn't laugh. He walked to the table, picked up a bottle of water, and stared at it for a long moment. "You okay, man?" Terrence asked. Malik looked up slowly. His voice came out low, steady, like a calm before a storm. I'm gonna need y'all to trust me today. Of course, Terrence said, eyes narrowing slightly. Whatever happens, don't interrupt. Don't stop me. Just let it unfold. Now, everyone in the room was quiet. What are you talking about? Terrence asked, stepping closer. Malik unscrewed the water bottle, took a long sip, and exhaled. I'll explain after. He walked to the window again and looked out. Harlem was still bustling below, unaware, uncaring. His world had shifted on its axis, and the city just kept humming like nothing had changed. But Malik had changed. In those few minutes, a part of him had died, and another had been born. Stronger, sharper, clear-eyed. He would not be disrespected in front of God and family. He would not pretend in a room full of people who loved him. He would not be a fool in a tuxedo. Downstairs, the ceremony was ready. The choir lined up. The pastor waited with a patient smile. Guests fanned themselves with printed programs, chatting about how young love is still alive and they make such a beautiful couple. The scent of lilies filled the air. String music played softly. The doors were about to open. Malik stood behind them, breath steady, hands no longer trembling. The planner gave the signal. We're ready, Mr. Jordan. He nodded. Terrence leaned in, his voice low. You sure? Malik didn't flinch. She called me Plan B. Terrence's eyes widened, but he didn't say a word. He stepped aside, and Malik stepped forward. The organ music began to swell through the grand hall like a wave of warmth and tradition, echoing off marble columns and polished wood. The chandeliers glittered overhead as Malik stepped through the double doors, his frame tall, dignified, and quiet as stone. The guests stood, hundreds of eyes turning to admire the groom. Phones went up. Smiles followed. But Malik didn't smile. He moved slowly down the aisle, past the elders in Kent cloth and church pearls, past the teenagers whispering in excitement, past uncles giving respectful nods and aunties fanning themselves. Everyone saw a groom walking toward his destiny. No one saw the storm behind his eyes. The pastor, a large man in his 60s with a voice that could shake rafters, stood at the altar and reached out to grasp Malik's hand. Today's a beautiful day, son. You ready? Malik nodded once. Yes, sir. I am. He took his place at the front as the music changed. The bridal march began. Slow, grand, every note a declaration. Then she appeared. Aaliyah stood at the top of the aisle like a vision, dressed in a white mermaid gown that hugged her curves, her veil floating like mist. Her father, tall and stern, held her arm. The crowd gasped audibly. She smiled sweetly, the perfect bride. Her eyes sparkled with practiced joy. Malik watched her descend with the poise of a pageant queen, every step carefully measured, the picture of elegance. But he didn't see his bride. He saw a mask. When she reached the altar, her father gave her hand to Malik. He accepted it briefly. Her skin was warm, her smile genuine. To everyone else, it was a fairy tale unfolding. To Malik, it was a closing act. Aaliyah leaned in. You okay? She whispered. I'm fine, he replied, his voice even. You look beautiful. Her smile widened, unaware of the gravity in his tone. The pastor cleared his throat, holding up a leather-bound Bible. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice booming, we are gathered here today in the sight of God, in the presence of family and friends, to witness the union of Malik Jordan and Aaliyah Thomas. Malik's eyes swept over the crowd. His mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Terrence stood just over his shoulder, eyes flicking to him every few seconds. The bridesmaids stood fanned out in soft lavender, Simone among them, her gaze proud. Every element had been rehearsed, every word planned, but Malik had no intention of following the script. The pastor continued, if there is anyone here who has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Until Malik took a step forward. He turned to face the audience and held up a hand toward the pastor. If I may, before we go further. The pastor hesitated, surprised, but nodded. Malik turned back to the guests. His voice was steady, every syllable ringing with clarity. I know today is supposed to be a celebration, and I thank you all for being here. I really do. He glanced at his mother. Her face shifted in confusion. He looked back at Aaliyah. This woman standing beside me, she's stunning, smart, driven, and I loved her with everything in me. Aaliyah's smile faltered slightly. Her head tilted. Malik continued, "But a marriage built on pretense, on hidden truths, is no marriage at all. And I can't, in good conscience, walk into a lie. Not with God watching. Not with my ancestors watching." A gasp rippled through the room. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. Aaliyah's voice cracked. "Malik, what are you doing?" He turned to her. "I overheard you earlier, talking to Simone, about how I'm not the one, about how I'm Plan B." Her breath caught. Simone's eyes darted around wildly. "I didn't come here to shame you. I didn't come here to create a scene. But I can't pretend. Not for photos. Not for expectations. Not even for love that's one-sided." Aaliyah stepped closer, panic flaring. "It was a joke. Malik, baby, I was nervous." "I was nervous too," he said quietly. "But I wasn't mocking your love behind closed doors." The room fell completely still. Aaliyah looked around, her cheeks flushing under the soft lighting. "You can't be serious. You're really doing this? Right now?" Malik looked into her eyes. "This is the only time to do it." Terrence moved from behind him, standing near just in case things escalated. Ms. Ruth sat, unmoving, her hand pressed to her chest. Simone whispered, "Oh my God," and stepped back slowly from the bridal party. Malik looked to the pastor. "I won't be taking these vows, and I won't be marrying someone who sees me as a safety net." Aaliyah's eyes watered. "You're walking away?" "No," Malik said. "I'm walking toward my dignity." He gently removed the ring from his pocket and placed it on the altar. Then he turned, buttoned his jacket with grace, and walked down the aisle, not hurried, not ashamed, but with a peace that settled deeper with every step. The guests parted in silence. Phone stayed down. Eyes followed him, wide with disbelief and awe. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the Harlem pavement. Malik stepped into it like stepping into a new beginning. Behind him, the ceremony dissolved into chaos. Voices rose. Arguments flared. But Malik didn't turn back. He walked around the block, letting the city sounds wrap around him like a bomb. Horns honked. A jazz saxophone played from a nearby window. Life, indifferent and beautiful, moved on. And so would he. As he reached the corner, his phone buzzed. A text from Terrence. "You did the right thing." Another from his mother. "Come home, baby. I got cornbread and peace waiting." Malik smiled for the first time that day. Not because he'd found a happy ending, but because he refused to settle for a dishonest one. The wedding was supposed to be remembered for its glamour. The choir, the flowers, the regal pairing of two successful Black professionals joining families in the heart of Harlem. Instead, it was remembered for its silence. After Malik walked out, the church hall stood in a kind of stunned paralysis. Aaliyah remained at the altar, her mouth slightly open, her veil hanging loose around her shoulders like a ghost of what was supposed to be. Simone looked frozen, her hands gripping her bouquet like it might anchor her. The pastor had lowered his Bible, unsure if he should say a prayer or call security. No one moved. For several long seconds, no one even breathed. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not gossip, just slow, confused murmurs from the rows of guests. "Ain't no way that just happened." "He left her at the altar?" "What did he say about Plan B?" The news didn't take long to escape the building. Within 20 minutes, someone had already posted a blurry video clip of Malik's speech on social media, captioned with, "Groom shuts down wedding after overhearing bride's shocking confession." By the time Malik reached his mother's brownstone on 145th and Lenox, the video had crossed city lines. Hundreds of thousands of views. Thousands of comments. Some calling him a hero. Others saying he should have handled it privately. But most respected the quiet, brutal dignity of what he had done. Ms. Ruth opened the door before he could knock. She didn't ask questions. Didn't say, "I told you so." She simply pulled him into her arms and let him rest his head against her shoulder the way he did when he was 8 and skinned his knee on the concrete outside school. "Sit down," she said softly. "Let me fix you a plate." In the kitchen, the smell of smothered chicken, sweet potatoes, and cornbread filled the air. Ms. Ruth didn't believe in comforting people with words. She did it with food, with presence, with knowing looks that said everything her mouth didn't have to. Malik sat at the table, his jacket draped over the chair, tight loose around his neck. He hadn't cried. Not yet. He didn't feel the urge to. He just felt clean, like a heavy mask had been lifted. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Terrence. "You good?" Terrence asked the moment Malik picked up. "I'm solid." "You sure? You just made front page on Shade Room, Black Twitter, and your old high school alumni page." Malik let out a soft laugh. "Figures. Man, folks are saying you walked away like Malcolm X in a tux." Malik smiled for real this time. "Let them talk. I'm proud of you, bro. That took courage. That took restraint." Malik leaned back in the chair. "It took knowing I'm worth more than being somebody's backup plan." Terrence was silent for a moment. "You ever gonna talk to her again?" "I don't know," Malik admitted, "but not today." Meanwhile, back at the venue, Aaliyah had locked herself in the bridal suite. Her father argued with the event planner. Simone sat with her head in her hands, replaying the conversation in her mind. She hadn't meant for it to go that far. She thought it was a joke, but jokes have teeth. Aaliyah hadn't cried yet either. Her pride wouldn't let her, but her hands shook as she peeled off her veil, her manicured fingers trembling with shame or anger or maybe a mix of both. She opened her phone to messages flooding in. "What the hell, Aaliyah? Did you really say that about Malik?" "Girl," he walked out. "At the altar. Who does that?" She didn't answer any of them. She just sat on the white love seat, surrounded by flowers and makeup mirrors, while her perfect wedding unraveled like thread from the hem of a dress. Back in Harlem, Malik sat with his plate, chewing slowly, not out of hunger but out of ritual. His mother sat across from him, sipping tea. "You were raised to know your value," she said quietly. "I'm glad you remembered that today." He nodded. "You ain't gotta explain it to nobody," she added. "Not even her." "I know. Love should feel like home," she said. "Not a test you gotta pass. Not a trap you get talked into. Home." He stared down at the plate. The food blurred slightly, not from tears, but from release. He had spent months convincing himself he was making the right decision, that Aaliyah loved him, that their chemistry was enough, that maybe love didn't have to be fireworks, just quiet compatibility. But now he saw it for what it was. She didn't choose him. She settled for him. And he had almost settled for her, too. That night, he turned off his phone. No interviews, no responses, no reposts. He didn't need to ride the wave of internet praise. He needed to grieve what could have been and be grateful for what he'd escaped. He went to bed in his old childhood room, still painted navy blue, with posters of Miles Davis and Muhammad Ali. It was the first peaceful sleep he'd had in weeks. Across the city, Aaliyah scrolled through comments in bed. Some called her cruel. Some called her honest. A few defended her, saying men do this all the time. But none of it mattered. She had been left at the altar by a man who carried himself with more grace walking away than most people at standing still. She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, and for the first time in years, she didn't recognize the woman looking back. The next morning, Harlem woke up buzzing. The story had gone viral, not in a slow, creeping way, but like wildfire. Everyone from barbershops on 125th Street to morning talk shows on BET and YouTube had something to say about the groom, who walked out at the altar with nothing but a few words and his dignity. He didn't yell, didn't cause a scene. He just said what needed to be said and left. Even media personalities who usually lived for drama had to admit, Malik's decision wasn't petty. It wasn't performative. It was principle. And for a lot of people, especially black men who rarely saw themselves portrayed in emotional strength without violence or rage, it felt like something sacred. Malik didn't know any of that yet. He woke up to his mother humming gospel in the kitchen and the sun stretching gently across his old twin bed. His head felt clearer than it had in weeks. He didn't reach for his phone. He got up, showered, pulled on a fresh white tee and gray sweats, and went downstairs to the smell of cinnamon French toast and fresh coffee. Ms. Ruth slid a plate in front of him without a word. She sipped from her chipped Harlem Renaissance Festival 2002 mug and waited. "You sleep good?" she finally asked. "I did." "You ready to face the world?" He thought for a moment. "Not all of it, but I'll start with the barbershop." They both laughed. After breakfast, Malik walked the few blocks down Lenox Avenue to Kenny's Cut and Fade, a neighborhood staple. Kenny had been cutting his hair since he was 14. The man was part barber, part therapist, part walking archive of Harlem history. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped in. Every head turned. "Look who it is," Kenny said, raising his razor mid-fade. "The man, the myth, the legend." Malik chuckled. "Don't start." The room broke into applause and laughter. A few brothers clapped him on the back. One young dude in the corner even asked for a selfie. Malik sat in the chair while Kenny draped the cape over him. "You good?" Kenny asked quietly, adjusting the clippers. "I'm better than I expected." "You know, you did something out there yesterday." "I didn't do it for an audience." "Doesn't matter," Kenny said. People needed to see a black man walk away from disrespect with grace. Not anger. Not revenge, just self-worth. Malik sat with that. He hadn't thought of it that way. "I just knew I couldn't build a life with someone who didn't choose me fully," he said. "That's not partnership. That's convenience." Kenny nodded. "You're gonna be all right. And if you need a quiet space, you know this chair's always open." Malik left the barbershop feeling lighter. The city, as loud as it was, didn't press in on him the same way anymore. He had his walk back. That quiet, confident Harlem strut that said, "I know who I am, even if you don't." He spent the next few days off the grid. No Instagram, no email, no text replies, just peace. Meanwhile, across the city, Aaliyah wasn't doing so well. The online backlash had intensified. Someone had leaked the full audio of her conversation with Simone, and it didn't take long for it to circulate. The words rang out clearly in every repost, every blog clip, every reaction video. "I didn't choose Malik because of passion. I chose him because he's stable. Malik is the safe bet. He's not the one who excites me. He's the one who can pay the bills." She didn't recognize the sound of her own voice anymore. Even some of her closest friends had gone quiet. Her bridesmaids' group chat, once full of glitter and gifts, had turned into a graveyard. Simone texted once. "I'm so sorry, sis. I didn't mean for that to happen." Aaliyah didn't reply. She sat in her apartment, the wedding dress still bagged in the closet, the deposit for the honeymoon non-refundable, and the man she thought she could quietly settle with now etched into internet history as the groom who walked with class. She hated how graceful he had been. She hated how many people were praising him. But more than anything, she hated that a part of her agreed with them. Back in Harlem, Malik found himself walking through Marcus Garvey Park one evening. The sun was setting, casting gold across the basketball courts and playgrounds. The city was alive but calm. It was a reminder that life continued. As he sat on a bench, a woman in her late 50s approached slowly. Elegant, soft-spoken. She wore a deep green head wrap and the kind of eyes that had seen much and judged little. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the young man from the wedding video?" He smiled politely. "Depends who's asking." She laughed gently. "My name is Ms. Gloria. I work with young men at the community center around the corner. We watched your video today." He raised an eyebrow. "The kids watched that." "More than watched," she said. "They talked, really talked, about self-respect, about not chasing love that doesn't see them, about walking away without destroying yourself. You gave them something, even if you didn't mean to." Malik sat back, surprised. "I appreciate that," he said. "Truly." Ms. Gloria nodded. "Pain can be a teacher, but dignity? That's a legacy." Before she walked away, she placed a small envelope beside him. He opened it after she left. Inside was a handwritten note. "The world teaches our boys to fight, for love. But sometimes the fight is in knowing when to walk away. Thank you." He held the note like a sacred thing. Because in that moment, he realized his story, his decision, wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about choosing healing, choosing self. And in a world that often asked Black men to carry burdens in silence, he had spoken, without shouting, without fists, without bitterness, just truth. And now it was time to rebuild. Fall had started to settle over Harlem like a soft blanket. The leaves on the brownstone-lined streets turned golden, the air had that crisp snap, and Malik, now 3 weeks removed from the wedding that never was finally finding his rhythm again. He'd gone back to work at the architecture firm downtown, easing into the space like a man returning not just his job, but to himself. His colleagues gave him space. Most didn't mention the video, but there were glances, admiring ones, respectful. His boss, Mr. Klein, had pulled him aside during a team meeting. "You handled yourself with more composure than most people I know," he'd said. "Take whatever time you need. You're valued here." It meant more than Malik expected. Still, when he got home at night, back to the same apartment he and Aaliyah had picked together, signed together, he felt the silence hang a little heavy. Some evenings, he'd light a candle and play Donny Hathaway just to fill the space. Other nights, he sat on his balcony with a tumbler of bourbon, thinking less about what he lost and more about what he nearly stepped into blindly. Because that's what it was. He wasn't just grieving a relationship, he was mourning the version of himself that almost chose comfort over truth, safety over passion, image over authenticity. But he wasn't angry anymore. He was growing, and that's when he met Jade. It started with a coffee spill, the kind you only see in rom-coms. He was walking out of Bluebird Cafe on 145th, double espresso in hand, when she rounded the corner in a rush, head down, earbuds in, scarf fluttering in the wind, and bam, hot coffee, flying paperbacks, and the unmistakable "oh no" of two strangers in the wrong place at the same time. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, crouching down to retrieve her books. Malik was already dabbing his shirt with napkins, laughing despite himself. "Well, at least I'm awake now." She looked up, and for a second, just a second, everything paused. She had wide, curious brown eyes, locks pinned up with silver cuffs, and a smile that didn't apologize for being real. "I swear, I'm not usually this chaotic," she said. "I swear I don't always smell like burnt espresso." They both laughed. She introduced herself, Jade Turner, a writer, Brooklyn-born, Harlem-based for the last year, working on her second novel and teaching creative writing part-time at a community center. He introduced himself, too, almost sheepishly, not as the wedding guy, just Malik Walker, architect. "Wait," she said, squinting slightly. "You look familiar." He waved it off. "Probably seen me at the coffee shop." She didn't push it, just smiled and asked if she could buy him a new cup to make up the mess. And that was how it started. Over the next few weeks, Jade became a rhythm in his life. Not a disruption, not a rescue, a rhythm. They met for coffee again, then dinner, then walks through Riverside Park where they talked about everything from black art to childhood scars to the books that changed them. She wasn't flashy, but she had fire. The kind of fire that burned from within, the kind that challenged, warmed, and didn't burn you unless you lied to yourself. She never asked about Aaliyah, not directly, but she noticed the way he stiffened when conversations drifted toward the past. One night, sitting on her fire escape in Harlem, drinking wine from mismatched mugs, she finally said it. "You don't owe me details, but I can feel your caution." Malik looked at her, thoughtful. "I was supposed to be married 3 weeks ago," he said. "At the altar, I found out I was the backup plan, the safe option, and I walked away." She didn't gasp, didn't flinch. She simply nodded. That takes a different kind of strength. "I didn't feel strong at the time." Of course not. That's the thing about growth. It never feels like power when you're in it. It feels like breaking. They sat in silence for a moment, the city breathing below them. Jade spoke again, voice softer. "I'm not here to replace anyone, or to fix anything. I'm just here. And I like you, exactly as you are." Malik exhaled, deep and unguarded. No expectations, no performances, just presence. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was learning the hard way that silence can be louder than scandal. She tried to control the narrative, issued a carefully worded statement on her social media about miscommunication, pressure, and respecting Malik's privacy. But it didn't land. Her followers weren't buying it. And deep down, neither was she. Her inbox was full of brand deals pausing until the situation settles. A popular podcast canceled her scheduled appearance. Even her wedding planner posted a subtle TikTok about watching out for people who choose stability over sincerity. Worst of all, the guy she had confessed excitement for, her ex, had ghosted her. Not in a cruel way, just disappeared. She messaged him once the day after the wedding. "I walked away from everything. Can we talk?" He replied 3 days later. "I think you walked toward nothing. I'm not trying to be in that." That was it. So now, in her luxury apartment full of peonies and mirrored decor, Aaliyah sat alone, surrounded by everything she thought mattered, and yet somehow emptier than she'd ever been. Because it turns out, having options isn't the same as having value. And love, real love, isn't built on what someone can do for you. It's built on what someone is willing to stand for. And Malik had stood for himself. By late November, Malik found himself walking past the church where his wedding was supposed to take place. He hadn't planned to stop, but something tugged at him. He stepped inside. Empty, quiet, rows of wooden pews still etched with the echoes of people's most sacred days. He sat in the same seat where he had once waited to say, "I do." But this time, he didn't feel anger or shame. He felt clarity. This was the day he almost said yes to a life that would have broken him slowly. But he chose himself. And now, with Jade, with his work, with his community, he was learning that the right no could be the beginning of everything. Winter had settled over Harlem by the time Malik walked into the community center where Jade was reading an excerpt from her new manuscript. The room was packed, buzzing with warm laughter and the smell of hot cocoa. Folding chairs lined up in crooked rows, kids playing in the back, old women from the neighborhood nodding along like it was church. Jade stood at the front, radiant in a long mustard-colored coat, curls pulled back, eyes alive. Malik took a seat in the back, quietly, just in time to hear her voice, steady, confident, vulnerable. "I used to believe love meant being chosen. That being picked, desired, pursued, that was the win. But I've come to understand that real love is about knowing who you are, and still inviting someone to stand beside you in it, without needing to shrink, twist, or perform." The room was still. A few murmurs of agreement. One older man whispered, "MMM." Jade glanced up. Her eyes found Malik. She didn't smile immediately, but her gaze softened. And that was all he needed. He stayed after, helped stack chairs, chatted with teenagers who recognized him now, not as the guy from the wedding video, but as Jade's guy, the man who showed up, the one who didn't let betrayal turn him bitter. Later that night, they walked home together, gloves brushing, breaths making clouds. "I liked what you said," he told her, "about love." She looked sideways. "You would have liked it more if I'd finished the last paragraph. Why didn't you?" She shrugged. "Didn't feel right. Not until I knew how the story ends." He stopped walking. Her eyes lifted toward him, questioning. And then, quietly, he said, "Maybe we write it together." She smiled. Not wide, not grand, just true. And that was the beginning of something honest. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Aaliyah scrolled through her phone alone in her apartment. Her brand was struggling. Engagement down. Influencer friends distant. Her own reflection felt like a stranger lately. There had been no closure with Malik. No final talkie. Just silence. That was the worst part. She thought about texting him 100 times. But what would she even say? "Sorry I underestimated you?" "Sorry I didn't know what love really looked like." Or maybe just, "I see it now. I see you." But Malik wasn't hers to message anymore. That realization was sharp. He had moved on, not out of revenge, but because peace called louder than pride. And she was still performing, still trying to win at a game he'd stopped playing. The following Sunday, Jade and Malik sat on the steps of the Apollo Theater, sipping coffee, watching people bustle by with shopping bags and holiday spirit. She leaned against his shoulder. "You ever think about writing your own story?" she asked him. He looked over, amused. "I'm not a writer." "You are," she said. "You just don't use a pen." He thought about it, then nodded. "Maybe I'll start with this chapter. The one where I almost married the wrong person, just so I could remember how grateful I am I didn't." She smiled. "I like that, but you should also write about the version of yourself you found after." "Why?" "Because that's the story worth telling." And he knew she was right. Weeks later, a message popped into Malik's inbox. It was from Aaliyah. Short, no excuses, no justifications. "You were the safest place I ever had. I didn't realize it until I lost it. I'm sorry." He read it once, then again, and then he deleted it, not out of cruelty, but because healing sometimes means letting go, not just of the person, but of the version of yourself who kept waiting for an apology. He didn't need it anymore. That night, he curled into Jade's arms, the two of them wrapped in a blanket of soft jazz and whispered promises. He kissed her temple and whispered, "Thank you for not asking me to be anything but me." She smiled into his chest. "That's the only version I ever wanted." Outside, snow began to fall, quiet, pure, unbothered. And inside, Malik finally fell home. Not in a place, not in a title, but in truth, in love that never asked him to perform, only to show up. And he did. He finally did.